those who will be perhaps joining in a bit as well. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for joining us today. We bring a talk organized by Three Moon Foundation on health and well-being in the month of Ramadan. A clearly highly relevant topic, given that we're about a week away from the blessed month of Ramadan. Inshallah, we will get to see it and partake in its blessings. Today we have with us brother Dr. Zakaria Goga. He is a GP who works in Sale in South Manchester, and he will be illuminating us with the topics around healthcare in Ramadan, in terms of guidance on how to safely fast, particularly when you have certain chronic conditions. So without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Goga if he's ready to kick it off, and then we look forward to hearing from him. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody. Just want to thank 3Meme again for arranging this. I'm just going to share the screen with you for the presentation, then we'll kick off, inshallah. Tosif, is that visible?
It is, that's absolutely fine, yes, visible, okay. Fine.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya wa ala. So we're going to talk about Ramadan, how to gain control of your health. We're going to go through a few common medical conditions and just how to manage it in Ramadan, inshallah. There's a few things, however, before we start, that we have to have as like a backdrop, and the rest will make sense, inshallah. Firstly, what I'd like to say is what our scholars, Jazahumullah khair, and our ulama, they say is that, remember, the starting point of Ramadan is that it's a form of worship. It's an ibadah. It's not a festival. Why is that important? Because our ulama over the centuries, in fact, from day one, they've explained that one of the benefit of fasting is to gain a sense of God consciousness, what's known as taqwa. And the method of doing that is by reducing your food intakes, because that reduces your blameworthy soul, what's known as the nafs, from just going wild. And so, unfortunately, what happens in a lot of our circles is that food comes out that's never been seen the whole year round, or lots of food come out. But that could be prevented by starting with this notion that remembering that Ramadan is an ibadah, it's a form of worship, it's not a festival. The festivals are Eid. So it's a perfect time to calibrate a person's health. An individual with a medical condition and those even without a medical condition, it's a perfect opportunity. So we're going to talk about how to maximize things in Ramadan, and we'll try and cover the common medical conditions that our communities face. But remember, there's a starting point here that, look, it's really difficult to give a generic one-size-fits-all advice to people, because each individual is an individual. Their medical problem is individualized according to the person. So it's really, really important that everybody who's listening, or if you have a family member that you might want to pass this information on to, you must check with your personal doctor, your GP, about clinically where you are. You're clinically stable to make these changes, and you're clinically stable to fast as well. And if you're not clinically stable to fast, then you must then discuss it with a mufti or a sheikh to discuss options on how to manage this. Because remember, we doctors, myself, other doctors, we will openly and happily say that we're not muftis, we're not shuyukh, we can't give you a legal ruling on what to do with your fast if you're clinically stable or unstable. So the key message is check in with your GP about your clinical state, and if you're unstable clinically to fast, because they are long fasts, 16-hour fast, do discuss it with your mufti and your sheikh or whoever you feel comfortable with, who has ijazah, permission to give rulings. Okay. So let's start with heart disease. Interestingly, it's actually safe to fast for those who have heart disease, such as high blood pressure, or if they have what's called stable angina, or they've had a heart attack and it's been a while since you've had a heart attack and you're stable, you're on medication, things are well controlled. If you've had an irregular heartbeat, or you have a diagnosis of an irregular heartbeat, in particular, the common one is atrial fibrillation, which is what AF is. people with a pacemaker, people on blood thinning tablets like warfarin, apixaban, dabigatran, things like that, rivaroxaban. It's actually, looking at the data, it's actually safe for people to fast as long as they have stable diseases. There's no evidence out there that there are increased cardiac events like heart attacks, for example, or angina attacks during Ramadan, which is good to know. And in terms of, if you just look at cardiology, most drugs in cardiology that we prescribe are either once or twice a day. It's very rare to have 3 times a day medication when you have a cardiac problem. And most cardiologists will say that you can, if you take it twice a day, for example, you can take one at Sehri and one at Iftar, and the gaps aren't too bad to do that. It's actually okay. So you can relax it basically if you have stable heart disease with no changes really to your medication and no worry of things getting worse. However, it is, so I'm not saying that it's, you should not fast. What I'm saying is that it's risky, and then if this resonates with you, then it's important that you check in with a mufti or a sheikh. That anybody who's had a recent diagnosis of angina, or has had a bout of angina, or has had a heart attack within the past 6 weeks, okay, within the past 6 weeks, it's very, very risky to fast. Anybody who has uncontrolled hypertension, their blood pressure is high, they're on multiple medications, and it's still difficult to keep it under control. It's risky. And also that group of patients who have uncontrolled hypertension, sometimes they do go on tablets more than twice a day, so they need to take it. So it's really risky, very risky to fast in this group of people, these groups of people. And then heart failure. So that's when the heart doesn't pump the blood around as effectively as it should or could, and you end up with excess fluid retention, fluid on your lungs, fluid on your ankles. It can get difficult to breathe. And so again, these people, they have to take medication that reduces that excess fluid intake, so they urinate a lot. So when they're on fluid restriction, that makes life hard for them because they're on water tablets and so forth. So the risk of dehydration kicks in if you fast. Also, they're the same group of people who might take medication more than twice a day. Very, very risky for them to fast. And those with unstable arrhythmias, which is an irregular heartbeat that's not well controlled, because then you might need to take medication more than twice a day. So if you basically, in these conditions, if you skip a dose while you're fasting, it might make your condition worse. And so if this does resonate with you, check in with your GP to check if you're clinically stable or not. And then if they say no, you're at risk, then check in with a mufti, because there's not much leeway one can do with medication in this sort of a situation. On that note, on heart disease, we talked about this in the seminars that we did last year. Anybody with any heart disease, go on this diet, the Piopi diet. So it's written by Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's a cardiologist in London. It's game changer stuff. In fact, for anybody who is overweight, for example, or has heart disease, it works, and it might be worth looking into and taking steps to go on this sort of a diet, because it's very, very healthy for you all round if you suffer from heart disease or if you're at risk, basically. Okay, let's move on to asthma and COPD. Generally, again, it's okay to fast for those with stable disease, and that's defined as not having frequent flare-ups where you need to go on emergency medication like steroids, for example, or recurrent antibiotics for chest infections. So if you don't have many flare-ups, you haven't had hospital admissions, generally that's stable disease, then what you can do, you can use your inhalers as usual at Sehri and Iftar if you're on it twice a day. Some inhalers are once a day, but you can use it Sehri and Iftar with no problem, no worry about making things worse, as long as you're stable, okay? However, again, it's very risky for those who have unstable disease. So if you are an individual who has frequent admissions, or on frequent use of the blue inhaler or nebulizer, that's called a reliever, or you have frequent use of steroid medication, so inhalers, they come with as a steroid inhaler as well, but if you regularly have oral steroids to help when you have flare-ups, that's a sign that you have unstable disease. Your lungs are fragile. Now, if you are in that group, if you do have that large gap of 15, 16 hours of taking your inhaler, in between that period, you could be at risk of exacerbating, making your lung condition worse. And remember, your body's going to be under stress through that 16 hours of not eating and potentially dehydration and so forth. Again, it's very risky. And the thing with asthma and COPD, it can be life-threatening in moderate to severe cases. So if you're in that bracket, think, I'm not just on inhalers, I'm on tablets as well. Or I regularly have to take steroids to relieve me of my flare-ups. Or I go into hospital often. You've really got to think, okay, I need to speak to my GP or my doctor or my specialist nurse at the practice, and then check with the mufti what the options are. What's really important though is, and Ramadan is a week away, inshallah, but what's really important is to plan well in advance of Ramadan, well in advance. And it's important to have actually a plan with your GP or specialist asthma or COPD nurse for Ramadan. For example, if you do have stable disease, or the GP is giving you the go-ahead if you have, say, moderate disease, it's really important, for example, to always carry that blue inhaler with you, as a when you need it. It gives you that relief just in case if you're struggling. So it's really important to have it with you, and also asking the questions that, is it safe for me to fast, and then what signs and symptoms do I look out for if I am going to fast, where I should actually think about breaking it because I'm really struggling here with my health. Remember, Islam it wasn't designed to cause torture or harm, and preventing harm, it actually comes first before anything else. And then ask your GP, is it because some people who, not so much on COPD, but with asthma, some people, they're on steroid inhalers like Clenil or Cuvar, which they just take twice a day. And then they have the blue inhaler just when they need it. But there's an option actually to change your inhalers to a mixture of a steroid, a component of which it has a steroid in, and it also has something that acts as a bronchodilator, so it relaxes your airways, but long acting. So it lasts for a good 8 to 10 hours, and you can take that twice a day at Sehri and Iftar, and it works well. So there's a possible option to change to what's called the long-acting versions. Maybe speak to your GP for the option for Ramadan, to move on to a long-acting version of the inhaler. That's something to think about if you have asthma and COPD. Okay, moving on, epilepsy. So this is a tricky one. Generally, with my patients, the feedback from neurologists has been that in Ramadan, there is an increased risk of seizures because of the large gaps in between the doses of your medication. So generally, most anti-epileptic medication, so to prevent seizures from coming on, most of them are twice a day, and it's really important to keep it to that 10 to 12 hour window. And what neurologists tell us is that when you have larger gaps in between the doses of medication, it can actually bring on a seizure. And also the second thing is sleep disturbance. So you remember is that Ramadan was designed for the nights of Ramadan, wasn't it? There's so much virtue in standing in qiyam in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and tarawih and night vigil and so forth. So what happens is, Isha will be about 9:30, 9:45. Tarawih will last for about an hour and a bit. You get home maybe in bed at 11 o'clock, and then you wake up at 3 o'clock, 3:30 maybe, for Sehri, and then you have your Sehri, you pray your Fajr, and then in bed for 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then up again for school runs and work. So there's a lot of disturbed sleep. So there's a risk. So what's important is to, if you can, discuss with your neurologist, because it depends on the stability of your disease, of your illness, which actually depends on the frequency of your seizures. So if you're somebody who hasn't had one for years, possible that this would work, that Ramadan would work for you. But if you're somebody who has frequent seizures, my guess is, because of my experience with patients, is that the neurologist will say it's risky, and then again speak to the mufti, because of the points that we've mentioned about what to do. Okay, the real stuff. So that's just a whirlwind view of the common stuff. But one of the things that we wanted to discuss was diabetes, because it's complicated when it comes to Ramadan. It's not straightforward, but it's one of those conditions that impacts us more than the others, because there's so much of it around. So definitely need a personal Ramadan plan. These sort of things need to be planned 2 months in advance, ideally, before Ramadan, ideally. So it's very complicated. It is individualized. If some of this goes, it's a bit too complicated, apologies. But I'm going to try my best to try and keep it simple just to cover the basics. Okay. Those with stable disease generally it's okay to fast, but it depends on your HbA1c. That, in a nutshell, this looks at your sugar levels over a 3-month average. Okay. It depends on your HbA1c. Generally, they say that anybody with a HbA1c of less than 60 tends to be okay, but it also depends. It doesn't just depend on that. It depends on the types of medication that you're on and all the other factors that's associated with diabetes, such as any kidney problems, associated heart problems, vascular problems, so problems with the blood vessels, which may affect blood pressure, feet, etc. Age, obesity, how frail an individual is. It's not just one thing that determines whether it's safe to fast in diabetes. So these are the sort of things that you need to bear in mind, because it's not just based on your sugar levels. Okay, so let's do the easy bit first. Who's at high risk when it comes to fasting? Okay, generally what diabetologists tell us is that any type of diabetes that requires insulin, regular use of insulin, so type 1s and type 2 who are on insulin, is risky, because to get the dose right is difficult. It's doable, but it's difficult. Those who have frequent high sugars or low sugars, okay? If you have frequent high sugars or low sugars, it is risky, because when you fast, your sugars drop. And then when it comes to iftari, we get hungry, we eat a lot, and a lot of our foods are carbohydrate based. So there's a risk of sugar going up. But if you have frequent episodes of this, it's tricky. Chronic kidney disease is when your kidneys don't function, they don't get rid of that waste as well as they should or could. There's a massive link with diabetes. There's 5 stages. Your GP will be able to tell you what stage you're on, but if you're generally 4 to 5, it's risky along with diabetes. Other things that, remember, high risk, again, you put all these into the equation along with age, because the older you are, the harder it is. And other, especially cardiovascular diseases associated with it, like heart disease, cholesterol, angina, high blood pressure, previous strokes, any problems with circulation, and so forth. So again, if that ticks your box, then check in with your GP just to triple check before you just go and fast and cause harm to yourself, and check in and then ask a mufti what to do. But there's in diabetes a lot, for type 2s generally, if you're stable, you can fast. The tricky bit is what to do with medication. So I'm going to run through the common ones that we prescribe, and then some, quick tricks that you can do to try and help yourself. And this is taken from, there's a really good article in the British Medical Journal last year about this, from diabetologists, how to make it work, basically. So if you're on metformin, generally it's safe. And generally they say if you take it once a day, take it after iftari. If you're twice a day, sahri and iftar is fine. If you're taking it 3 times a day, take 1 at sahri and 2 at iftar. That's the normal release, okay? But if you're on, you can then switch it to slow release, so it's in your body for a longer period of time. And they recommend that if you do that, it's better to take it at iftari as opposed to at sahri. And I'm guessing, presume because we eat more at iftari, basically. That's why they recommend the change at iftari. If you're on canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, they recommend no dose changes, but an individual must be well established on this prior to Ramadan for at least 3 to 4 weeks. It's not recommended to commence it anytime earlier before Ramadan. It makes you, urinate more. And so really important to make sure that you're adequately hydrated and take it at iftari, because we eat more iftari. And generally hydration, you're looking at least a litre and a half, at least to a litre and a half a day minimum, when you can drink, that is. So some injectables, if you're on Trulicity, Byetta, or Ozempic, no dose changes, but again, you need to be well established prior to Ramadan. And again, it's not recommended to commence it close to Ramadan because of instability. There's no guidance of when to take it. However, a lot of these are just once a week, so it shouldn't make a difference because it's released over a long period of time. Okay, gliptin's another group. If you're on any of these, there's no dose changes. However, if you're on one of these, so sitagliptin, vildagliptin, but you're also on another tablet called Glipizide or Glipizide, the dose of the Glipizide or the Glipizide that needs to be reduced or even stopped. And the reason being is that these two together can drop your sugars very low, and put you at risk of having a hypoglycemic attack, especially in the elderly. So make sure you check with your GP about this, because this could be an issue when you fast. Again, there's no guidance when to actually take this one, which is reassuring. And usually some are once a day, some are but usually most are just once a day. Okay, pioglitazone. Again, they recommend no dose changes. However, again, you must be on it for at least 3 to 4 weeks and stable before you actually consider, fasting. And they recommend taking it with the largest meal again, which is usually iftari. And again, if you're on gliclazide or glipizide, these two again, you've got to reduce the dose of glipizide, or even consider stopping it because of the risk of your sugars becoming low. Okay. And then finally, gliclazide and glipizide. Basically, because this can drop your sugars and the risk of hypoglycemia, especially in the elderly, there's a recommendation to actually drop the dose or even stop it and consider changing it to something else temporarily or even long term if it works, because of the risk of hypoglycemia. So make sure you check in with your GP if you're on. Don't worry, the slides will be shared. This is all recorded if I'm going too fast. Okay, if you're on insulin, so it's workable, but it's very complicated. And as I mentioned, there's lots of factors involved that we've talked about already, but there needs to be a robust plan for Ramadan with your diabetic nurse. So it is workable. It's complicated. There's no need for me to go into it because it's an individualized issue, but it's possible. I think that's what I'm trying to say if you're on insulin. And if you're type 2 and you're just on insulin once a day, it's highly possible. So some people, they're just on an evening long-acting insulin once a day. It's possible that they could make it work for you, but the doses do need to be changed. Develop a plan with your diabetic nurse, basically. Okay, in terms of dietary advice, again, ideal situation is a nutritionist. Okay, but it's really hard to get hold of one these days, because it's all about talking about how to prevent a hypoglycemic attack and also preventing hyper when it is time to eat. But the key is I'll talk about what foods to eat in a second, but one of the biggest keys is proper portions. So unfortunately, what happens is in Ramadan, our portions do increase because we get hungry. But actually in diabetics, if you don't get the portions right, your sugars go sky high. And if you do that for 30 days, your diabetic control is going to go out the roof. There's also a recommendation, not just this is for diabetics, but also I recommend it for everybody: physical activity after meals. So, especially after iftari, go for a walk, or if you've got any equipment at home like a treadmill or a exercise bike or anything, a stepper, anything, just consider 20-30 minutes after a meal doing something for 5 to 10 minutes, just to help with the metabolism. And the reason being is because we tend to eat high carb foods, which I'm going to talk about, which ones to have, which ones to not have. But that's the reason why we've got to really have a very well set plan for Ramadan. So what should we eat? Okay, now this is not just for diabetics. This is recommended for pretty much everybody with any clinical condition. So it's quite universal and it works really well for diabetics. But for Sehri, what's recommended is to have protein. And eggs are absolutely fine. They've had bad press because of talk about it raises your cholesterol. It doesn't. It's fine. Okay. Eggs are fine to consume for Sehri. And now protein, other sources of protein. Common one is fish and meat. I don't know about you, but I cannot stomach that at 3-4 o'clock in the morning. So eggs are fine. And then the other thing you want to think about, and this is not just for diabetics, this is for pretty much everybody, is think slow release carbohydrates. So remember we talked about this last year. There's 2 types of carbohydrates. There's the quick release ones, which give you that kick of sugar, and then you have this crash 2 hours after. And you've got slow release, which stay in your system for a little bit longer, gives you that energy over a long period of time. That's what protein does, give you energy over a long period of time. So think oats, porridge oats, and if you're going to have bread, try and reduce it, but have multi-grain wholemeal bread as opposed to white. And even consider fruits and even veg if you can stomach it, because they're slow release carbs, most of them. And drink plenty of water. And this is really important during these long days, is to drink loads of water. So when you can, between iftari and sehri, when it's possible to eat and drink, aim to have at least a liter and a half a day of water. And if you can't stomach that water, because it's hard to drink all that food in the middle of the night, then have water-based foods. So think cucumber and think watermelon, or even consider having soups for Sahri. Again, it's hard to stomach, but if you plan ahead, like if you practice now, or you should have been practicing 2-3 weeks ago, but if you practice now, it's palatable. You know, you'll get used to it. So soups in the morning is a good source of water intake as well. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, look, this was done by Dr. David Unwin, who's a national guru when it comes to diabetes. He's a genius. Anyone who's got diabetes, or even if you haven't and you don't want to get it, just follow this guy. He's really, really good. He's done some groundbreaking stuff. So he said to us at a webinar recently, he said, this was my breakfast: a bowl of brown flakes, some milk, brown toast, and apple juice. And he said, and then I worked out how much sugar I'm having, and I'm having 16 teaspoons of sugar. Conclusion is, it's not fats that's making us fat, it's sugar. It's sugar that's causing most damage to our bodies when it comes to diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. And so this is like an average sehri for most of us, but it's 16 teaspoons of sugar without realizing. So let's move on. Look at normal stuff that we have in our, in our kitchen. Which child does not have Cocoa Pops for sehri? 7 spoons. And this is like, the variety packs, the small variety packs that we get, that's 30 grams. We have like double, triple that in our bowls. 7 spoons. If you're doubling it, that's 14 teaspoons of sugar in there. Now, glycemic index on the left, the higher it is, if it's over 65, it's problematic. It's basically the higher the glycemic index, the more insulin you require to deal with that sugar. Look at cornflakes, 93, 8 spoons of sugar. Look at if you look towards the bottom, so the special K seems to be okay. Oat porridge, it has a higher glycemic index, that's fine, but remember it's slow release, so it's released over a longer portion compared to the other ones here. But this is just to get you to understand how much sugar is actually in our cereals. Oat porridge is okay because it's released over a short period, as in a longer period. Okay, let's move on. Okay, why is this important? Because look, hold on. No, yeah. So remember we talked about 2 types of carbohydrates. So there's complex carbs, which are slow release, actually good for you. And you've got simple carbs, which are fast release. If you don't burn them off, they get converted to fats. So they give you energy, but if they're hard to break down and metabolize, if you don't burn it off, it turns to triglycerides, which is fatty acids. And then you know where it goes. Look, no Frosties, no Cocoa Pops, no usual Kellogg's cereals at all. No white bread. Go for wholemeal or multigrain. Okay. For iftari, no chips, no biscuits, no chocolates, tons of sugar, no halwa, no fizzy drinks, no. I'll just have one, cake because it's iftari. None of that. Your sugars are going to go. The Dr. Tariq will tell you the 2 biggest sellers for the past year in lockdown have been alcohol and chocolate, because we're going mad in these 4 walls, right? And he'll tell you so many of my diabetics, their sugars have gone out the roof because of comfort eating and stress eating, and bichara, you feel sorry for them. What else can you do? But they make your sugars go sky high, and your diabetes will go out the window. Whereas if you go for the top, so instead of normal potato, go for sweet potato, which is a little bit better. Anything that's green, leafy, it's slow release carbohydrates, very, very good for you. Think brown instead of white. Think fruit, especially the berries, okay? Really, really good for you. You want to think of these things as opposed to the bottom list of simple carbs for sehri and iftari, especially for iftari, okay? When it comes to iftari, try this, okay? Break your fast with khajur and or fruit if you're a little bit hungry, and water and nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. And the reason why I say that is because I've been doing this across masjids in Manchester, and we've had this open conversation that before COVID, what used to happen was in an average masjid was that you go to the masjid for Maghrib, and then the adhan would go, and you'd have something to eat, and there'd always be food in the back that somebody's bought, pizza, samosa, pakora, you name it. It's because it's a festival, isn't it? Right? So we eat loads, and then we pray Maghrib, and then we go home, and even though we're a little bit full, to not upset our mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, whoever's cooked for us, we feel obliged to eat. So we eat more, Then we go for Tarawih, and then we come back, we're a little bit tired, we'll just see what's in the kitchen and we'll just eat a little bit more. And in essence, you're having 3 iftars without realizing. Whereas the best thing to do is break your fast with khajur and or fruit if you're hungry, and water, nothing else. Okay. And then pray your maghrib with ease. Okay, with absolute ease. And remember, Ramadan is about cashing it in. The reward is astronomically greater in Ramadan than out of Ramadan. So for example, after maghrib, we did this recently with one of our teachers. If you pray 6 rak'at, 2 sunnah, 4 nafil after the maghrib prayer, it's in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, you get the reward of 12 years of worship. 12 years of worship just by doing that. It's a win-win situation. So aram se with ease, pray your maghrib, pray your sunan, pray your nawafil, and then eat just once properly after the maghrib prayer. And then when you do eat, think what we've talked about: protein and slow release carbs. Okay, so when it comes to iftar, fish is great, meat is great, nuts actually have a decent amount of protein in it. Think almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, the tree nuts. And slow release carbohydrates that we've talked about. The point is that unfortunately we eat as if we've never seen food before, and unfortunately the average weight of a Muslim goes up. Okay, so it's all about eating right and getting the portions right. So the question for diabetics, they come up, what about dates? The consensus is that it's safe to eat 2 or 3 with iftar, and if you're diabetic, no more. If you're not diabetic, I'd say max 5, but 3 should be fine, inshallah. But no more than 2 and 3 if you're diabetic. So it is okay. But all these other foods, okay? Now look at how we're going back on the sugar thing again, okay? This is Dr. David Unwin's slide again. Look at rice. This is a staple diet. A 150-gram serving, which is a small serving, has 10 spoons. A potato has 9. Chips, a portion of chips has 7.5. Okay, just look at these numbers on here. Okay, so if you go more towards the bottom, it tends to be less. Okay, but you want to think, especially if you're diabetic, you want to have what we call a low carb diet, basically. Low carb diet. If you're going to go for carbs, then slow release carbohydrates, because it's sugar that's the problem. Now, I'll give you some quick wins, and we've talked about this in detail. You can refer to the old videos if you want to from last year, but some quick wins as a substitute, because a lot of these things, whenever I deliver this in local masjid, like recently I did it in my local masjid on the way home yesterday, people were saying, what am I supposed to eat? And you've took out so many staple things from my diet. So firstly, I say to them, look, this is going to be really hard I know it's really hard for a lot of people because it's a generational thing, but we have to have open conversations. Unfortunately, our Apna Asian diet probably doesn't suit this climate for multiple reasons. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Okay, a lot of people think this. So it's about having that paradigm shift, firstly, okay? Then doing some quick wins. Swap naan, roti, chapati, bread for green leafy vegetables. So, Mathalan, what you do, like you say, how can I have a salad without roti? So you say, okay, so what you do, if you have a spoon, and if you want to dip, because it's a psychological thing, it's a cultural thing, dip with green leafy vegetables. They say, well, how can I have, salad and rice without the rice? I say, okay, what you do, you get fine chopped vegetables or have cauliflower rice, and that can become your rice. So fine chopped vegetables, and that can become your rice. They're quick wins. Swap potato for cauliflower. Swap potato for cauliflower or sweet potato, which is a little bit better. But what you want to think about is, okay, I'll have naan, I'll have roti, I'll have chapati, I'll have bread, but I'm going to go whole grain or brown, and I'm not going to have it more than twice a week. Okay, I'll have rice, no more than twice a week. The rest will be chopped veg. I'll have potato, but no more than twice a week, and I'll swap it the rest for cauliflower, because how can you have a salad without potato, right? And I will never have all 3 together. I will never have all 3 together because that's just too much carbohydrates. But have a think about this, quick wins for you. What's protein? We talked about this: eggs, meat, fish. Dal is brilliant. Dal has got tons of protein in, not much sugar. It's one of those power foods. Dal is absolutely fine. Chickpeas, nuts that we've talked about. Okay, the protein rich. Avoid, especially, and this is for everybody, okay, avoid fried foods completely. What they do, they turn the oil into a semi-solid molecule state, which is really hard to digest, basically, and it sticks in places where you don't want it to stick, right? It's really hard. Just avoid. And if you're going to have a samosa, air fry it. If you're going to fry anything, air fry it, okay? You're going to have chips, don't fry it, oven them. Have oven chips instead. Avoid sugary foods completely. They give you quick bursts of energy, but you then have a crash. And that's why if you ever wonder why you're falling asleep in Tarawih after the fourth rakat and you've just eaten, is because the sugar has you've just had a crash. It's been utilized. It's been taken up from the cell into the muscle where it's needed. It's gone. Okay, it's not. So then you have a crash and you feel hungry and then you want to eat more. So sugary foods, it doesn't work in Ramadan any time of the year, but it definitely doesn't work in Ramadan. Limit your salt to prevent thirst. Really, really important. Avoid sunflower oil and corn oil because it is proven to increase fatigue. Our Prophet ﷺ recommended cooking in olive oil. So consider cooking in olive oil. It's much more healthier for you. And limit your caffeine because it acts as a diuretic. It makes you go to the toilet. So if you're going to have tea or coffee, then have it, just one at Sahri, one at Iftar, that's it. Even less will be better because it makes you go to the toilet. And if you're going to have it, remember to replace 1 cup of tea with 1 extra glass of water as well. Now, basically, in summary, what your plate should look like is this. It should be half veg and salad, quarter protein, quarter whole grain, slow release carbohydrates, okay? And a glass of water, no fizzy drink, no juice, etc. Because again, even like orange juice, one apple is fine. But going back to that apple juice, that slide that we showed of Dr. David Unwin, it's 8 teaspoons of sugar in 1 glass. Eating 1 apple is fine, but a lot of apples go into making that apple juice. So just stick with water, okay? Interesting, the process, and I only ever drank 2 things, water and milk. That was it. And there has to be reasons for that. While we're on it, we've talked about it last time. If you're type 2 and you're stable, not on insulin, try this from now. Okay, we've used this on our patients. It works. You can reverse your diabetes, potentially get off medication as well. You can reverse your disease process. And if you haven't got diabetes, this will prevent it from coming on. It's proven, it works with our patients. Try it, but you must discuss with your GP because you probably will need to make medication changes and you need to monitor your sugar levels as well. Because obviously they'll come down through dietary changes. You won't need you won't need as much of that medication. So take a look at this. It's a really important book. For everybody, keep active, okay? In Ramadan, we tend to be less active for obvious reasons, and then you end up with muscle loss. If I have my hand in a sling for 2 months, you have atrophy, muscles waste. So it's really important to keep relatively active. So even during the day, if you can tolerate it, go for a walk for 20 minutes, no problem. After iftari, do a small workout just to get that food digested, just to get that metabolism going. If you're well, you're able, your joints aren't too bad, try a 7-minute scientific workout. Just Google it. 7-minute scientific workout. If you can't do the full thing, do half of it and do it at a pace that suits you. You don't have to go for it. It's very, very mild exercises, okay? It works, but I think the key is do something. A brother who lives around the corner, who prays at our local masjid, he's a police officer. He says that my endurance in Ramadan is fine. I can still go to the gym and train. Is that okay for me? I said, absolutely fine. If you have good injury, even in Ramadan, Bismillah, go keep active, no problem. But do something. Don't just, become a couch potato for 30 days. Really, really important. The key message is, look, eat correct portions and eat right. If you have a good, like we talked about, half fruit, veg, quarter protein, quarter slow release carbohydrates, and your portions are good, correct, not huge, and you're eating right, inshallah, you'll be fine. But it all boils down to this: does food control you, or do you control food? Do you live to eat, or do you eat to live? And this is the message of Ramadan, that we should really just be thinking about, we control food, we eat to live, because it sustains life, not live to eat. So remember, just a summary, prepare before Ramadan, and one option for people, if you have a medical condition, checking with your GP first. But if you don't, highly recommend reducing your intake before Ramadan, because there's no switch in your body that will just, the day after you're fasting and you'll be fine. You won't. You won't feel good. And when you eat, you'll overeat, and then you won't feel good either. So start to reduce your intake. If you can, have 2 meals a day. Adatul Anbiya, the habits of the prophets was to eat once a day. Adatul Awliya, the habits of the close ones to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is marratain, twice a day. So 12 hours apart, like we talked about last year. If you can fast, just to get into that habit, if you can. Remember, it's predicated on the fact that it's a form of worship. It's an ibadah. It's not a festival. Plan your meals and make it diverse. And one thing I will say, and I've repeatedly said this, that nobody, no man listening to this should ever say to their wife in Ramadan, make me this. Why? Because just as we have our moments to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and engage with Allah in Ramadan, so should they. They should not be locked up in the kitchen, looking after your belly, really. And if it really bothers you that you want to eat that, bro, you need to go and make it yourself. Okay, because you have to respect your other half. That's how relationships are made and made solid. If you respect the other person, there's no way, we shouldn't be having our wives in the kitchen, making what we want in Ramadan. Whatever's there, khalas, it's there, no problem. Okay, so plan, work with your other half and make it as diverse as possible. Don't overeat and drink plenty of water. And my final thoughts on this, and I'll finish with this, is look, anybody can do this in terms of what we're going to talk about next. Take the way of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even medics will tell you that it's the safest way to be when it comes to health. Okay, famous narration of the Prophet sallallahu in the Sunnah of Tirmidhi, that there is no vessel that the son of Adam fills sharram min batnihi, worse than his stomach. It's enough for the son of Adam to have luqaymat. Luqma is a morsel. Luqayma is a small morsel. Luqaymat, our Arabic teachers explain that it's between 3 to 9 morsels. Yuqimna sulba, enough to just hold your back straight. And if you can't do that, for thuluthul ta'am, 1/3 for food, for thuluthul sharab, 1/3 for fluid, wa thuluthul nafasihi, and 1/3 for air. When you look at the commentary of this from atibba, doctors, especially of the past, of the great generations, they've said the entire medicine, the principle of medicine is based on this statement here. And throughout centuries, these doctors have relied on this as like the principle of medicine. And fast forward 1400 years from the process, and when I mentioned this to my work colleagues, one of them nearly fell off a chair, saying if people just did this, we'd be fine. So have a think about the prophetic way of eating. Think about how the Prophet ﷺ sat when he ate. Get hold of the Shama'il of the Prophet ﷺ. Beautiful book by Imam Tirmidhi, same author. Beautiful book. Talks about the Prophet ﷺ inwardly, outwardly. It should be a constant read in a human being, in a Muslim's house.
If you need the plates.
And what the Prophet ﷺ, how did he sit? The most commonest way, obviously, was on the floor. He was either crouched down or sat on his left leg with his right leg bent upwards, so his knees towards his chest. And our ulama, they say the reason why he sat like that was to compress his stomach, so that he could have like a feedback system to tell him when he's a little bit full, so he doesn't sit there and eat to his full. The dua of the Prophet ﷺ, just by saying Bismillah or saying Alhamdulillah each time you eat, watch things change. You'll feel full quicker. And not only that, you'll have this immense joy from the depths of your soul that Allah's giving you this. It makes eating a completely different experience. And obviously after you finish eating, the Prophet ﷺ ate most of the time with foods that were edible with his hand. These 3 fingers, that's it. It's impossible to overeat if you're eating like this. Try it. That's prophetic. And he rarely ate to his full, and he had no longing for food. No longing for food. Our ulama, they explain that the Prophet ﷺ's timetable, all night he'd be in Qiyamul Layl making dua for you and I about the people to come. Will they be okay? All night crying until his legs would stand, until his legs would swell. And then, he'd go for Fajr. And then after Fajr, he'd see to the needs of the community, ask anybody if they've seen a dream so he could interpret it. The children of Medina Munawwara would bring buckets of water. This is in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. He'd put his Mubarak hand in, and then they'd take it for barakah, tabarruk. And then he'd see to the needs to his community. And then he'd go home he'd pray duha in the masjid. And then he'd go home about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock our time. He'd go home and he'd ask his wife, do you have anything to eat? No, I guarantee you nobody listening to this has had to say this when they've gone home or come home from work or whatever. Have you got anything to eat? Anything? Guarantee you. And then the wives often would say, we don't have anything. And the Prophet ﷺ would be like, khalas, inni idhan lasa'im. I'm fasting then. No problem. That's the way we should be, that there's no real longing for food. And look, the Sahaba who followed him, Ibn Umar, Aisha radiallahu anha used to say that if there's anybody who imitates the Prophet ﷺ, who at a high level compared to anybody else of the companions, it's Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu warada. And he said, for 12 years I never ate to my full. Why? because he said, I passed by a group of people who preferred to remain hungry, as in his father, Abu Bakr, Uthman, Ali, Sa'd ibn Waqas, the Sadat of the Sahaba. That was their preference. And Umar radiallahu anh, because of the hadith that we just talked about, our scholars of hadith, they explain that he would only eat 9 morsels maximum with each meal. And he'd refuse to eat halwa, in our terms, halwa, until and unless he knew that the poor would regularly eat these sort of foods. That's the mizaj you want to have, in Ramadan. Obviously, if you have a medical condition, it has to be controlled, but generally that's the sort of mizaj that you want to have. And the reason why this happens is because we've stopped reading and we're glued to our devices, and we've stopped reading the lives of the best of people. The best of generations was the Sahaba, then the ones after them, the ones after them, and then the way of the ulama, the way of the scholars. And if you just tap into some of these books and look at some of the habits that our greats had, worlds apart. And why is that important? Because if you and I lose our benchmark of who is our model, who's our guide, to be like, everybody models on something, whether you can see it or not, subconsciously you do. You model yourself on something, on an ideal. And if our ideal isn't the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, isn't, then it's not the Sahaba or the Tabi'in, the great scholars of the past. If it and the scholars amongst us right now, if it's not modeling on that way, then what are we modeling ourselves on? And you can actually lose, you're on the wrong way, you've lost your way type thing. It's really important to re-engage with one of our teachers used to say, if you don't have, the one who doesn't know his history has no future. And recently I heard this from one of our shuyukh. He was saying that, look, if food is not benefiting you, you're either not eating halal, or you're eating halal but it's not tayyib, it's not wholesome, or you're not eating sunnah foods. And if you are eating all three, you're not eating in the prophetic manner, because food should nourish you, it shouldn't make you ill. And brothers and sisters, this thing, we are in a generation where we've got food that is making us ill, and sugar is one of the biggest ones. Lastly, look, remember, these, again, we've talked about, following the greats of the past. This is from the great scholar Ibn Abi Dunya. He said that, Abu Ja'far said that when a human being, when the belly is full, the body will transgress. And so there's a spiritual realm to this, which I'm sure, you'll arrange programs with ulama to talk about, will give you more insight. But the scholars of suluk, of, purification of the heart, they'll tell you that the one who eats a lot, it's really hard to spiritually progress, because the nature is that when the desire is filled, you go on to something else, and it can lead to transgressing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are just some thoughts. We'll stop there, inshallah. I hope that's been beneficial. With questions, remember, I can't answer personal questions. It's pretty much impossible. So if it's personal. So Rafiq, do people with low BP need to take any particular care during fasting? Absolutely. So the question is, why is your blood pressure low? Understand? That needs to be found. You need to find that out first. Why is it low? If it's been investigated and you're just naturally, you have low blood pressure, then the most important thing is fluid intake. And that's why the recommendation is to have water-based foods during Ramadan. So for Sahri, it's really important to go for soups. Okay, it's water-based. Watermelon, cucumber, it's just a lump of water, isn't it? Along with probably protein more than anything else. But it's really important to pump yourself with fluids. But the key is, why is it low? It needs to be investigated.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Zakaria. Some exceptionally useful and beneficial information. Really appreciate the time you've taken and the effort you've taken to present the material today. We do still have a few minutes, so if anybody still has any questions they would like to pose to Dr. Zakaria, please do so. You have a few minutes left. If not, then unless Brother Zakaria, if you have any wrap-up remarks at all, or I think, or anything at all.
I tried to say, when I've been doing this season before Ramadan, is, just anything in life, just take the way of the Prophet ﷺ. It's just that, you know, you're less chance of making a mistake. And when it comes to your health, you'll find the same. And if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, right, you know, he went back to his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala when 63. Never did he have a belly. Like, he didn't have a belly. If you look at the descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ in the Shama'il, for example, they say his chest and his stomach was straight. And he was a fit individual, and even in his 60s. But there's a reason why. And if you look at his lifestyle, he didn't overeat. Neither did the Sahaba, and how he ate as well, and what types of food he ate as well. So I think my key message is just in this Ramadan, make a conscious choice. Yes, I want to improve my health, and that's ridiculously important. But I'm going to take it to another level. You know, where am I in relation to the way of the Prophet ﷺ in everything? You know, how do I wake up? How do I sleep? How do I, you know, choose to do what I do? Why do I do what I do the way I do it? And then just try and bring yourself back to that. Every single thing that you do is imitating the Prophet ﷺ and nobody and nothing else. And you'll find that your life will have so much ronak, so much nur, so much light, so much ease, so much rahat. It works.
Thank you very much. I think that is the point to wrap things up with today. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Zakaria. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge and the effort you've gone to today. Everybody else, inshallah, you've benefited from that. Inshallah, everybody has a healthy and well Ramadan, and we have a number of further talks, sessions that are upcoming in the next few days. So please keep a lookout on our Twitter feed and our Facebook page for those, amongst which is a seminar on an introduction to prophetic medicine, which will be held on the 10th of April. Again, it will be a Zoom meeting. With that, I bid you farewell. Thank you very much again, Dr. Zakaria. Thank you again for that. And inshallah, everybody else stay safe and take care. Have a pleasant evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.